He rides out of the mist, silent and deadly, a ghost or a gunslinger, no one really knows. 40 years after Clint Eastwood's iconic Pale Rider hit the big screen, its haunting power still echoes. But what happened to the cast behind this classic? Fame, tragedy, redemption, their real lives rival any Western. Saddle up as we track down the stars and uncover the untold stories they left in their dust. Clint Eastwood as the preacher. He wasn't just a man, he was a ghost with a gun, a walking myth wrapped in dust and silence. In Pale Rider 1985, Clint Eastwood's preacher rides into a desperate mining town like an angel of vengeance, or maybe the devil in disguise. With no backstory, no name, and no mercy, he became one of the most haunting figures in Western cinema. At 55, Eastwood didn't just star. He directed the film, shaping its eerie tone and moral ambiguity. The preacher wasn't your typical cowboy. He was something darker, almost supernatural. Was he the same man Stockburn thought he killed? Was he even alive? The film leaves us wondering, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Off-screen, Eastwood was already a legend, but Pale Rider helped redefine him, not just as an actor, but as a visionary filmmaker. 2 divorces, 8 children, a trail of headlines, his personal life read like a movie script of its own, but none of it slowed him down. Today, at 95, Clint Eastwood is still behind the camera, still chasing stories that matter. Just like the preacher, he speaks little, but when he does, the world listens. Sidney Penny as Megan Wheeler. She was the heart of innocence in a brutal world, the wide-eyed girl who saw something holy in a man with a gun. At just 13 years old, Sidney Penny lit up Pale Rider as Megan Wheeler, the daughter of Sarah, caught between childhood dreams and the violence of adulthood. Her quiet yearning for the preacher wasn't just a crush, it was a search for a hero in a world that offered none. Penny's performance was disarming, honest, heartfelt, and far wiser than her years. It could have been the start of a Hollywood fairy tale, and for a while it was. She went on to star in soap operas like All My Children and Santa Barbara, becoming a familiar face on daytime TV. But growing up under the spotlight came at a cost. Fame in her teens meant pressure, instability, and a loss of normalcy. Relationships fizzled before they could root, and the fame she tasted early faded with time. Now 54, Sidney Penny has stepped back from the limelight, focusing on privacy, personal growth, and selective roles. She never became a tabloid star, but maybe that's the victory. Like Megan, she held on to something pure, even when the world tried to take it. Charles Hallahan as McGill. In a land ruled by guns and greed, McGill was a rare breed. A man who didn't just work the land, but stood ready to die for it. Charles Hallahan gave the character quiet gravity, portraying him as a loyal miner and fierce ally to Hull Barrett and the preacher. He wasn't flashy or loud, but when McGill stood his ground, you felt it. He was the kind of man that gave the West its backbone. At 42, Hallahan had already carved out a reputation in film and TV for playing salt-of-the-earth characters. His roles in The Thing and later in The X-Files showed his range, but it was his ability to disappear into working-class roles that made him so reliable and so relatable. Off-screen, life wasn't always steady. Hallahan went through a difficult divorce and battled financial hardship, especially as he aged. But acting was his anchor. Whether on stage or screen, he gave every role authenticity, never chasing the spotlight, just the truth. In 1997, Hallahan died of a heart attack at the age of 54, far too soon for a man whose performances still echo with quiet strength. As McGill, he stood beside heroes. In life, he was one. If you could bring one actor from this cast back for a modern Western, who would it be? John Dennis Johnston as Deputy Tucker. Every villain has their muscle, and in Pale Rider, Deputy Tucker was the brute behind the badge. Played with simmering aggression by John Dennis Johnston, Tucker was the kind of enforcer who didn't ask questions. He just followed orders and cracked skulls. His presence made every scene feel tenser, every confrontation more dangerous. At 35, Johnston had the look, rugged, intense, unpredictable. He brought authenticity to tough guy roles throughout the 80s and 90s, appearing in North Dallas 40, The Outlaw Josie Wales, and countless TV shows. Casting directors knew what they were getting with him: grit. But while the roles were steady, the personal road was rocky. Johnston's life off-screen mirrored the roughness of his characters. A stormy marriage ended in divorce, and he battled alcoholism and depression for much of his adult life. Like many in Hollywood's second tier, he found it hard to maintain stability in a ruthless industry. Now 75, Johnston lives quietly, away from the spotlight that once shaped his life. He never became a star, but as Deputy Tucker, he left a mark. A reminder that even minor characters can carry major weight in the world of storytelling. Carrie Snodgrass as Sarah Wheeler. In a world ruled by greed and gunfire, Sarah Wheeler was the soul that refused to break. Played with aching vulnerability by Carrie Snodgrass, Sarah wasn't just the preacher's admirer. She was the emotional anchor of Pale Rider. A woman torn between duty and desire, survival and longing, she brought warmth to the film's cold frontier. At 39, Snodgrass was no stranger to raw, complicated roles. She had already earned an Oscar nomination for Diary of a Mad Housewife, and her return to the screen in Pale Rider was a powerful reminder of her emotional depth. But behind the camera, her life mirrored the same mix of strength and sorrow she portrayed on screen. She had a son with musician Neil Young, a relationship as passionate as it was painful, marred by infidelity and heartbreak. Her career stuttered, her finances faltered, and her health deteriorated. Depression cast a long shadow. In 2004, while awaiting a liver transplant, she died of heart failure at just 58. A tragic end for a woman who gave so much, felt so deeply, and reminded us that even in the harshest worlds, grace can survive. Chris Penn as Josh LaHood. If Coy LaHood was the mind of evil, Josh LaHood was its wild, raging heart. Chris Penn brought a volatile energy to Pale Rider. His Josh was spoiled, impulsive, and cruel, a ticking time bomb with a silver spoon. At just 19, Penn wasn't acting like a bad man. He was channeling something raw and dangerous that felt terrifyingly real. It was clear even then, Chris Penn had talent. He followed Pale Rider with standout roles in Footloose, The Wildlife, and later Reservoir Dogs, where he held his own alongside Hollywood heavyweights. But behind the scenes, he was spiraling. The younger brother of Sean Penn, Chris lived in the shadow of fame, struggling with addiction, weight, and emotional instability. His relationships were short, turbulent, and often destructive. Hollywood saw flashes of brilliance, but never the full flame. On January 24, 2006, Chris Penn was found dead in his Santa Monica apartment. Heart disease took him at just 40, his body worn down by years of excess. It was a tragic, silent exit for a man whose screen presence always roared. Like Josh LaHood, Chris lived fast, burned bright, and left us wondering what might have been. Richard Dysart as Coy LaHood. He didn't carry a gun. He paid others to do the killing. In Pale Rider, Coy LaHood is the kind of villain that feels all too real, polished on the surface, rotten underneath. Richard Dysart played him with chilling precision, turning greed into gospel and power into poison. He wasn't a snarling outlaw, he was worse. He was corporate evil in a frontier suit. At 56, Dysart brought decades of stage and screen experience to the role. And while Pale Rider made him memorable to Western fans, it was TV that cemented his legacy. As Leland Mackenzie in L.A. Law, he embodied calm authority, earning an Emmy and the respect of his peers. But off-screen, his life was quieter, more private. He avoided scandal, worked steadily, and earned his place as one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors. No headlines, no meltdowns, just solid, committed craft. In 2015, Richard Dysart passed away after a long illness at the age of 86. His death didn't make front-page news, but maybe that's fitting. Like Coy LaHood, he knew how to move behind the scenes, commanding the room without ever raising his voice. Did any of these behind-the-scenes stories surprise you? Let us know in the comments. Richard Kiel as Club. He didn't need words. His size said everything. Towering at over 7 feet tall, Richard Kiel turned Club, the silent enforcer in Pale Rider, into a living wall of menace. Loyal to Coy LaHood and brutal when ordered, Club was more than muscle. He was a physical embodiment of fear. But in a rare twist, even he hesitated when faced with the preacher. That moment of doubt, it gave the giant unexpected humanity. Kiel was no stranger to iconic roles. Best known as Jaws in the James Bond series, he spent his career defying typecasting, using his imposing frame to create surprisingly nuanced characters. Behind that intimidating presence was a gentle soul, funny, warm, and deeply spiritual. His early life was marked by pain. A childhood accident left him with lasting injuries and health struggles that followed him into adulthood. Yet, he built a long career in Hollywood, often in the shadows, but never forgettable. Kiel died in 2014, just days before his 75th birthday, from a heart attack. His passing marked the end of a life lived larger than most, literally and figuratively. In Club, as in life, Richard Kiel proved that even giants can tremble, and sometimes they walk away from violence. Michael Moriarty as Hull Barrett. Hull Barrett is the kind of man who stands when others run. Honest, stubborn, and just naive enough to believe in justice. In Pale Rider, Michael Moriarty gave Hull a quiet strength, a moral spine that made him the human heart of the story. He wasn't the fastest draw or the toughest fighter, but he had something more dangerous: hope. At 44, Moriarty was already a seasoned actor with a reputation for intensity. His performance brought warmth and vulnerability to a harsh world, playing the one man willing to challenge power without a gun. But behind the scenes, Moriarty's own journey was far less peaceful. He would go on to star in Law & Order, but his outspoken political views and clashes with Hollywood led him to leave the U.S. altogether. His career dimmed, his presence faded, multiple marriages unraveled, and his battles with addiction became public. Now 84, he lives quietly, far from the spotlight he once commanded. Like Hull Barrett, Michael Moriarty stood up for what he believed in, even when it cost him everything. John Russell as Stockburn. If the preacher was death on a pale horse, Stockburn was the man who sent him there the first time. Ruthless, composed, and haunting, John Russell's portrayal of the corrupt marshal in Pale Rider was chilling in its restraint. He didn't yell, he didn't gloat, he just followed orders, with deadly efficiency, and when he realized who the preacher might be, it was too late. Russell, a former Marine and Western regular, had spent decades playing tough men, lawmen, outlaws, cowboys who lived by the gun. At 64, during Pale Rider, he brought a lifetime of grit to the role. You could see it in his eyes. This was a man who'd buried his conscience long ago. But Russell's real life wasn't far from the shadows he played. He battled alcoholism and struggled with personal demons that strained his relationships and haunted his private life. Fame came and went. Pain stayed. In 1991, he died of complications from a lung infection at age 70. His passing barely made headlines, but to Western fans, his final showdown with Eastwood remains unforgettable. As Stockburn, John Russell wasn't just a villain. He was the ghost of choices past, riding toward reckoning. Richard Hamilton as Jed Blankenship. Some men fight with fists, others fight with quiet resolve. In Pale Rider, Jed Blankenship was the latter, a weathered miner with a deep sense of right and wrong, willing to stand with the preacher when it mattered most. Richard Hamilton gave the role the kind of quiet dignity that doesn't shout, but stays with you long after the credits roll. At 64 during filming, Hamilton brought decades of experience to the part. He wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. He had a face that had seen hard winters and harder choices, and a voice that carried the weight of someone who'd buried too many friends. Jed was the everyman of the West, tired, brave, and unwilling to kneel. Hamilton's career was filled with similar roles: small-town sheriffs, wise old men, grizzled cowboys. You might not know his name, but you knew his face. Behind the camera, life brought heartbreak, the loss of a child, a rocky marriage, financial struggles in later years. Still, he kept acting because it's what he loved. He passed away in 2004 at the age of 83, leaving behind a body of work that may not have screamed star, but quietly whispered truth. Like Jed, he stood his ground and earned our respect. Fran Ryan as Ma Blankenship. She wasn't afraid of men with guns or bosses with money. In Pale Rider, Ma Blankenship ran her boarding house like a general runs a fort, firm, fair, and with a pot of coffee always brewing. Fran Ryan brought grit, humor, and heart to the role, making Ma more than just a background character. She was the town's spine, and maybe its soul. At 68, Ryan was a familiar face to TV audiences, having appeared in classics like Gunsmoke and Little House on the Prairie. Her specialty? Playing no-nonsense women who'd seen it all and weren't about to take nonsense from anyone. In Pale Rider, she infused Ma with that same tough love energy, becoming a quiet but essential ally to the miners and the preacher. Off-screen, Ryan's life mirrored her roles, full of trials, heartbreak, and resilience. A difficult marriage, personal loss, and the everyday grind of being a woman in a male-dominated industry didn't stop her from building a career that spanned 5 decades. Fran Ryan passed away in 2000 at the age of 83, leaving behind a legacy of characters that stood tall, even if they didn't carry a gun. As Ma Blankenship, she reminded us that in the West, strength doesn't always wear spurs. Jeffrey Weissman as Teddy Conway. Teddy Conway wasn't the fastest gun or the loudest voice, but he had something just as dangerous: belief. In Pale Rider, Jeffrey Weissman played the young, idealistic miner who looked up to Hull Barrett and the mysterious preacher, hoping for a world where justice still had a chance. He brought a quiet fire to Teddy, a mix of fear, hope, and youthful courage that helped humanize the stakes of the story. At just 26, Weissman was still early in his career, but his sincerity made Teddy stand out. A few years later, he'd step into one of pop culture's most iconic franchises, taking over as George McFly in Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3. For a moment, it seemed like he was on the edge of something big. But Hollywood doesn't always reward talent. Weissman faced career setbacks, typecasting, and the challenge of replacing a beloved actor. Roles became scarce and the spotlight moved on. Off-screen, he embraced a quieter life, teaching, performing in theater, and staying active in fan communities. As of 2025, he's 67, still working, still showing up for the craft he loves. Like Teddy Conway, Jeffrey Weissman believed in something bigger. And that belief, however tested, still burns. Herman Pope as Oleg Lindquist. He didn't say much, but he stood his ground. In Pale Rider, Oleg Lindquist wasn't a leader or a fighter. He was one of many faceless miners pushed to the edge, forced to choose between fear and freedom. Herman Poppe played Oleg with quiet strength, embodying the kind of man who doesn't seek attention but always shows up when it counts. At 41 during filming, Pape brought a lived-in realism to the role. You believed him as a man who'd worked the earth with his hands, endured hardship, and still found the courage to stand tall. In a film filled with larger-than-life figures, Aulick was the man in the background holding the line, and that mattered. Pop's career was modest. He never became a star, and his name rarely lit up marquees. But like many working actors, he gave everything to each part. His early life was marked by struggle, growing up in tough circumstances that shaped both his character and his performances. Though he stepped away from acting later in life, Pape continued to face challenges: financial instability, personal loss, and health issues. As of 2025, he is 81, living quietly, far from the cameras, but not forgotten by those who remember the men who stood with the preacher.